All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and sometimes touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. I'm Sasha Wolf with my, I think I've been saying here with my, but it's a virtual here. So virtually here with my friend and producer, Michael Chauvin-Dalton, who I think we just heard giggle. Hi, Michael.
Hi. Yes, I am from the great beyond in the virtual realm.
Not that beyond, just New Jersey. Don't get carried away.
Hey.
Some people think of New Jersey as the great beyond.
I know that very well.
Yeah, sorry.
It took me a while to get used to moving to New Jersey, but yes, anyway.
Dunking on Jersey, dunking on in the first 60 seconds of the podcast.
So listeners might hear a slight change in your audio quality because after several permutations of trying different things to reduce little echoes and sounds and sirens and things like that, we finally found a place for you to record, and the recording is better, but it did come at a cost, a little cost maybe to your dignity.
Yeah, I mean, if I manage to get through this intro sounding in any way, like having any gravitas whatsoever, it will be a miracle because I am in my closet. Yeah, I am. Yeah, laugh away. Everyone laugh. Get it out of your system. At my age, in the closet. I won't, a million jokes come to mind, but it's, of course, shooting fish in a barrel, so I'm going to control myself. But, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is, obviously, look, it's just so much easier to do these things either by building a home recording studio or by being in a professional recording studio, and I've had neither of those things, but I was not happy with the sound quality on any of the previous episodes, so I decided to do what I'd been trying to avoid doing, which was, of course, moving into my closet. But let's just say that I've turned my closet into a recording studio. Let's just call it a recording studio.
Yes.
I mean, why does it have to be a closet? I mean, okay, I am looking at coats, and I'm surrounded by jackets, and
but those coats and jackets are what's helping you right now. They're doing their part.
Yeah, they're doubling as acoustic
absorbers.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, the other question is, where is Peanut?
Yeah, Peanut is okay. So I have to keep the closet door open about an inch. Because there's an automatic light, and if the door was closed all the way, I'd be not only in the closet, but I would be in the dark, and that's just, I'm willing to suffer for the podcast, but I'm not, that's too much. So the door is open about an inch, and I swear to God that Peanut's nose is in that inch because she wants to be in here with me, doesn't understand why she's on the other side of the door. How could we possibly be separated while being in the same house?
Right.
Yeah. So she's basically right next to me. Yeah. So this is today's episode is a conversation with the photographer Adam Katseff. And what did you think about the conversation?
I thought this conversation revealed more about the kind of relationship, the connection, the mentorship that you have with those artists that you represent. There were so many interesting parts of this conversation where Adam is sort of recalling things you said to him, advice you've given to him, and even just the idea of being in the moment and recognizing success and taking in those times where people, are celebrating with you and really holding on to that instead of just sort of thinking about the next thing. I thought, insight into the way you not only talk about the work, but you talk about sort of living the life really came through in this episode.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there is definitely some of that. I mean, I realized after I recorded the conversation with Adam last week that Adam was in his 20s when we started. Adam has a certain maturity. I mean, I think I've always, almost been fooled, even though I know when he was born, but I always think of him as being older than he is. But, Adam's about 20 years younger than me. So, he had just a lot of maturity when I first met him. But yeah, of course, I've been able to, just pass on certain little nuggets of semi-wisdom that I've had just because of what I've been through and life experience that he hadn't been through yet. But that is a fun part of the talk.
Yeah, and I think it's also indicative of, it's not just a business relationship, that you actually are interested in this idea of trust between you and those that you represent, so that when you are discussing developing work or critiquing work, that everyone understands this isn't just about business and selling, that this is also about making the work that you want to work and being successful at it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think we say this explicitly. This may have come up in episode 1 with Brian Skipnot, but this is a long game. I mean, I really believe in the long game, and so you have to just let things develop in their own time. And yeah, I never play the short. It's always trying to think about my artists as living long lives and having long careers, and letting things unfold as they're going to. I mean, we all know that some things can happen, sort of tumble out quickly, and other things take a really long time to maturate, and we do talk about that.
And also, it does get to some of those great questions that you have in the book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice, and a little plug.
Your check's in the mail.
That's right. But, when you do ask Adam about how he identifies as an artist, he has this great line, and he has a number of good lines in the podcast. I don't want to give them all away, but he says labels are like funerals. They're not for the person or the artist. They're actually for the people who are there.
Right. It's for other people. Right. Artists don't need those labels for their own identification. It's for other people.
So we have made an executive decision that we're not going to read bios on air anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
I just felt really self-conscious doing it. And it just, I made such a big point in the book with the Aperture team when we were sort of at the home stretch that I didn't want these incredibly long bios accompanying all the contributors sections in the book. So we have these really short bios, and then we have all these really fun other things, like what was your first photo book, what was the first show you saw. So we decided to sort of have more fun with that. And it's because bios drive me nuts. Now, it is, of course, important to know, sort of major milestones of someone's career, but for the most part, I find them unhelpful and silly, and I just didn't want to be in a position of reading them every week. So we'll just have that in the show notes. Where will that be? On the whatever podcast platform?
The description. Yeah, so there's always a description of the podcast, a very short description, but we can include the bio in the descriptions.
Okay, good. That's great. And look, and obviously, we expect people to be Googling, right? Because we're talking about art and you can't see what we're talking about. So we always assume that anyone listening, if they're not really intimately familiar with the guest's work, will be looking all that up. So
yep, we're a visual arts podcast on the radio, basically.
Yeah. Woohoo! Whose plan was this? God, jeez. All right. Well, I think that covers. I will just say it's also very hot in the closet, so I'm I love talking to you, but
yes.
If you hear if we keep talking, you might hear a thud, and then you'll be like, Sasha. I assume at that point, Peanut will have figured out how to open the door with her nose, and she will come and save me.
It will be a great test.
Right, our relationship. Anyway, yes. Michael, thank you so much for chatting and starting us off again. Be well, and kick this thing off.
Oh, always my pleasure, and feel free to leave the closet now.
Thank you.
And here is your conversation with Adam Katseff.
Adam Katseff. Welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sasha. It's an honor to have a conversation with someone which seems pretty limited these days. So this is a nice change to my normal everyday life right now.
Yeah, we've busted you out of lockdown to have this conversation with
right.
me. So you're in outside of Boston, right?
Yep, in Brookline, which is just on the border of Boston, and in my studio currently, which is at home.
You know, you moved back from California a couple of years ago. So actually, why don't you tell us a little bit about your trajectory of how you wound up career-wise where you are right now, and that'll give people a little sense of your travels as well.
Sure. Well, I grew up in just north of Boston. So, and my wife, Amy, grew up here in Brookline and at MIT, where her parents work and are housemasters. So we're local to this area, and we met out here and went to California. A long story that maybe we'll get into is what led me to going to grad school at Stanford, but that's what brought us out to California in the Bay Area. And we were there for, I guess, 8 years, which seems like a long time now. But we were there for 8 years and decided that we were not Californians after all. And not that we ever thought we would be, but really wanted to be home near our families, and both felt that the East Coast and Boston in particular was where we felt most at home. And so we moved back, and just last summer we moved into our current house, and this is a studio here, which was a nice shift, and I'm very thankful for now given the current state of things. So we've got a yard which the kids can run around in, and a studio. So I feel very fortunate for both of those things in our current world.
I can't believe you've left out glory in this rundown of people who benefit from the So your first child was a dog.
Yes. Oh, well, I don't know if we can call her a dog, but yes,
well, yeah,
species why. Yeah. And actually, Sasha, the first time you and I met in person was, I think, like a couple of weeks after Glory entered our lives as a little puppy. And yeah, she's a bull terrier. And for those of you that are wondering what I mean when I say she's not quite a dog, you just go to YouTube and Google bull terrier antics, and you'll be very entertained.
Well, she looks a little bit like a dinosaur. So
yeah. Or miniature horse, or a pig, lots of things.
Right.
Yeah. She's a wonderful part of our family, and absolutely not to be forgotten.
You and I are good friends, and I've been representing you for a very long time, representing your work. And we share a lot of goofy, silly things like our obsession with coffee, intermittent fasting, and dogs, which when I think about it, and when you and I are just sort of goofing around talking about these things, seems perfectly normal. But just now when I say it out loud, it makes me feel a little bit like a cliche of, I'm not sure of what, but anyway, but it's the truth. These are things you and I tend to text about at all hours of the day and night.
It's true. Well, also we have a love of nice bags. Like
okay, just keep piling on.
Waxed canvas in particular.
I know. I think that this is, you and I are it's going from bad to worse here.
I'm sinking us here, Sash.
All right. So, well, one thing you skipped over, which was that you went to Mass Art for undergrad.
That's true. Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I guess in answering the question, I was thinking of travels, and Mass Art didn't seem like traveling because it was my local city. But yeah, that I should start there, because that I really consider my education there, which I feel very fortunate to. I feel very fortunate to have had.
I'm sorry that
that's okay.
Peanut's making. She didn't get the memo today.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a memo. That's all right.
Sorry, go on.
That's okay. So I went to Mass Art, and I feel I did not know I was going to be a photo major. It's interestingly, which was not why I went there, but it's interestingly the only state-run art school in the country, which I find, in hindsight now, even more special than I did at the time. But I went there and wound up in the photo department. I had a real love of photography, but when I was there, it was just the perfect fit for me. At least that's how I think of it now. And I really thrived there and had wonderful professors, Abe Morell and Laura McPhee and David Hilliard, and just people that really, and Barbara Bosworth, who I can't believe she's a good friend and also someone who you're working with now, but she is
keeping it in the family.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All people that I really consider my really influential in my shaping as an artist and as a photographer. So yeah, and then I felt really fortunate to work at a color lab called Color Services, and they printed for all of these professors and artists around the world and made exhibitions for museums and galleries and collections and things like that. And that was my job for 4 years out of Mass Art, doing C printing and color, analog, darkroom printing, and then running the mounting department, where we would take those prints and make them flat and ready to hang on a wall. And yeah, that I think in a way those two foundations are what led me to want to go to a grad school that was like the one at Stanford, which was absolutely anything but a photo program. And it was an art program. We're very interdisciplinary and very small. And I felt like my upbringing between Mass Art and Color Services was so, perfect in a lot of ways, like photography oriented, that I felt that as an artist, I need to get a little uncomfortable or break that comfort zone a little bit.
Wait, explain that. I'm really interested in what you mean by that, because Stanford, was very unexpected, is an unexpected choice after Mass Art.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's true. Well, Mass Art was, it's just an art school. We're a bunch of artists, and I was in the photo department, and all of my undergrad and then the graduate students there were all photographers, artist photographers, not even, the different range of what you could be, lumped under for a photographer. And we shared a history. We shared an encyclopedia of knowledge in some ways, and I'm not even talking just technical, which was always a nice benefit of that, as you could get pretty dorky with anyone you wanted in the program. But it more if I say XYZ by Emmett Gowan, for instance, who was someone who was very influential on me at the time and still is. If I said this work or this picture of Edith or whatever, they all knew it. Like we could have this, if I say Sally Mann, instantly everyone knows who I'm talking about. And that was at the lab too. We were very fluent in that. And I feel like that actually speaks a lot to the strength of Mass Art as a photo department. And I don't think I could have gotten a better photo education and art education. And but that being said, it was definitely photocentric. And I knew that a few years out of Mass Art, I'd go to MoMA, I'd go to museums and whatnot, and I would love the photo floor. I would love the exhibitions and be inspired and find, my favorite photographs on the walls and whatnot. But I kept finding, and sort of surprisingly, that I was inspired by the stuff that wasn't on the photo floor. More, whether it was a Richter painting or Joseph Beuys, who was I was very influenced by at the time, just in using objects and using material. And I felt like, feeling that feeling kind of in my gut of like, I'm thinking about the boys, or I'm thinking about, it seems like I like the Germans at the moment, Richter or Joseph Beuys, which I suppose I do. But yeah, it felt like, wow, all right, I need to be surrounded. It wasn't to say I wanted to make sculptures, or I didn't want to make, that I wanted to make paintings. I didn't feel that at all. It just felt like those are the types of people I want to be talking to, and I want to be influenced by and have looking at my work.
And so, Stan, just finish that thought.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Just tie that off for people who don't really understand what the program at Stanford was like.
Right. So, I mean, first of all, it's very small. 5 grad students are accepted into the program each year. So there's 2 years, so 10 MFA students total. You get a ridiculously beautiful studio That's like, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 square feet. Each artist has their own. I never had a studio before, so that was something unusual. It's fully funded, which was not the main drive of me going there. I hope to be able to make a decision with financial
stuff.
It's
pretty amazing, though.
It is, yeah. No, totally. And it absolutely played into my decision, but I think I could say that even if that weren't there, it still would have felt like the right program to me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, I'm very thankful that it was, in hindsight, for sure. And yeah, you take classes throughout Stanford. So, all the 5 other people, like there might be another photographer there. Possibly not.
So you're interacting a lot more with painters or sculptors, or that's sort of what you're getting at here.
Totally. Yeah. And actually Stanford, at the time I was there and still seemed to have a very sound heavy presence, both in the faculty and the other students, a lot of artists working with sound. So that was, cool. I would say that was the most represented artistic demographic at the moment. So I was absolutely had the resources that I needed, but I was definitely out of my comfort zone when I started. And it was a rockier start, I think, than I anticipated in the beginning. But ultimately what I think led to the work that you've seen and that has come out into the world.
So jumping off from there, what type of artist do you consider yourself now, today? How would you describe yourself?
Right. That's a good question. That's a very good question. And one that, my gut instinct, the moment you ask that says, well, I'm not an artist. So how can I answer that? And I think there's a little teenage angst of not liking titles and things like that coming out there. But the truth is, I don't know. I guess I don't think in those terms. Do I make art full time? Absolutely. And I have been for a long time. And that being said, whenever anyone asks me, what do you do? People that I'm meeting for the first time, what's your job? I have a really hard time saying I'm an artist. And I've never fully understood why. I think I just, for some reason, find that the label of that feels like a little odd, maybe especially artists, like it carries a lot of weight. Oh, he's an artiste, that sort of thing.
It feels too pompous.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I think it is used that way of, so many people saying, oh, he's such a good chef, or he's such a good this, he's an artist, or he's, it's like that sort of like, if you're good at something, you're an artist. And do I make art? Yeah, I think so. I'd like to think so. But it is always a question. And I get that a lot, when I'm out photographing in the landscape and people will be around and see me using somewhat unusual and fancy looking equipment. They're like, the question they come up to and say is, oh, are you a professional? I'm always like, my gut is like, I don't think so. No, definitely not. I mean, and I think I sort of imagine photographing a bar bat mitzvah or something. And I'm like, oh, I could not to say that I just wouldn't be very good at it. That's the reality. Like, I don't have that sort of professional. And so I think that's what they're asking. But then I have to say, well, yeah, I guess, technically my living comes from photographs, and like, this is what I do as a job. And even if I'm teaching and doing other things, like, it's around photography. And yeah, I am a professional. And then they sort of light up and then ask for my business card. And I have to say, oh, well, I don't have any of those. So I guess I'm not. And then I say, oh, but Sasha has business cards. She's my business card. And I give him your website. And you're my business card, Sasha.
When we get off of this, I'm going to pack some of my actual business cards in an envelope and send them to you.
It might be helpful, actually.
But could you say I'm a photographic artist, or does that?
Yeah, I don't even need that. Honestly, I hear this a lot now, and I think we all do of the last 10 years or so. People, I'm an artist who uses photography, or I'm an artist who works in photography. And I'm fine saying I'm a photographer. I think the labels are oftentimes helpful for, the context of like the people around you. I think if in an art context, I can say I'm a photographer and we kind of all know what that means. But in another scenario, I say I'm a photographer and they might think I'm doing like commercial work or weddings or, that sort of thing. And I sort of need to clarify, but I don't know. I guess I've always thought of labels as like this, as kind of like a funeral, right? It's like, they're not for the person in the casket. It's like the funeral's not for the person in the casket. It's for the people around to help to understand and cope with it. And I think the labels like that, like I don't feel like I need the labels for myself, but I do find them, to be helpful and to be able to help other people to understand what it is that I do. So
yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, I think one of the reasons this is just so personal and idiosyncratic to me, for me, and I think one of the reasons I'm sort of curious about this is I know when I was making films and people would say, what do you do? I mean, first of all, I made a living like working in production. So there was that. But I also found it hard to say, well, I'm a filmmaker because I didn't feel successful enough.
Right.
Like it was my own insecurity about, well, is that true? Does my work writing and directing films check enough boxes to allow me to use that title when talking about myself? Anyway, so I don't know. I'm always sort of interested in like what part of this is how we want to identify ourselves, how we want to be thought of, and then how do we feel about ourselves? What part do our insecurities play in how we think of ourselves and what we do in the art world? Because
Right.
it is like so... I mean, I think you described it really well. Like there's something that's sort of amorphous. Like I'm a photographer, I could be a wedding photographer, or I could be a photographic artist. Or I don't know. It is obviously not simple to answer.
Right. And I love what you said. And I'm really thankful that you mentioned the sort of self-consciousness or feeling like I haven't made it yet enough to assume said title. And I think that absolutely plays into it. I mean, I remember, I'm assuming, maybe for you, this is like a moving mark. It's like when I was not in grad school and before that I was just out of undergrad, I was like, oh, I'll be an artist when, and I have my MFA or I go through my grad school. Then I was like, I get that. And I was like, oh, okay, well, all right, well, maybe when I have a gallery or, if I work with a gallery or something like that, then I'll be an artist. And then sure enough, you came along and we started working together and things didn't quite change. I was like, oh no, okay, all right, I got to start selling work. Maybe it's the way the IRS counts it. Like, do I make any money from selling work? I need to make, which is absurd, right? That's like the most absurd. But it was like, yeah, maybe if I sell work, then I can be called an artist on paper, or maybe, and then, so now I have no idea. I nothing's changed. That mark keeps moving. So now I figure, a retro.
Well, you're being, hold on a second, because you're being, it's amazing the sort of intense modesty you just slipped in there that that our listeners may not know, but and of course maybe it's also just that sort of way that talking about money is considered sort of tacky. But you sell a lot of work. I mean, you are a very successful. You're a very successful artist in terms of sales. I mean, let's just say it.
Sure.
Let's just say it, right? So,
well, you sell the work, Art. You sell the work. I make the work that you sell. But yeah, no, that's, I appreciate.
So when you're talking about moving the goalpost, that's another goalpost you've now moved. I mean, how I feel about. I think people have to be really careful about moving goalposts because it's great if it keeps you motivated, but it's not great if it leaves you with a sense of never actually achieving that somehow
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but I used to always say this to my artists before opening nights of their exhibitions. And I know I said this to you, which is make sure tonight when people are coming up to you and telling you how much they love your work and how proud they are of you if they know you, or if strangers are coming up and saying, oh my God, your work is so wonderful. And I love this image in particular, whatever it is, people are saying, hear it. It's so hard in those moments because often you get overwhelmed, but it's so important to hear those things. And then I used to always say to you guys, go home if you don't go out after the opening and get plastered and too drunk to pick up a pen and
Right.
a piece of paper, write down some of the most wonderful things people said to you.
Right.
And then when you wake up the next morning, look at those things. And because these are these moments that you have to take in. You
Right.
have to take them in. You can't just fly over it and you have a big opening and then, okay, what's next? What do I have to
know.
achieve? you have to stop and I mean, it really is like stop and smell the roses, but it's so important.
Right. Well, it's funny you say that. And that was actually something that I saw sort of early on at Stanford was when I was in my first year and the second years were going, they weren't taking the MFA show super seriously as the professors thought, and missing deadlines, things like that. And one of the professors finally said, what the hell? Something has to be at stake here. What are you going to take it only serious when you've got the retrospective at Guggenheim? Like, is that
right.
when you start you have to take every show seriously, and your name is on this, and the work's on the wall, and I've always been that way. I've always, I'm just too persnickety and picky about what I put out into the world, and I mean, I don't have any social media accounts probably for that reason. Like, I guess I like playing it close to the chest, and that when it's out in the world, I feel good about it, and I feel really like it's the right thing. And I know this topic may come up, later, but no, I think that I know you always want to move that goalpost, but right, I guess keeping that. It is a goalpost that's always moving, and it's important
but not at the expense of genuine feelings of success and satisfaction as they come up, right?
Agreed. Yeah. And I think what you said, and I appreciate that. I think what you tell the artists and told me before the opening, it's, I don't know if it hit me in quite the way I needed it, or that I don't know if it hit me in the way that it did, that way I would need it now almost. But I honestly think the hardest part, at least for me as an artist and as a maker of things, especially now as sort of isolated as I think we probably all feel, but all the work that goes out into the world, whether it's on a wall for an exhibition, whether it's at a show, whether it's at a fair, whether, I'm not the one having those conversations. Like, I don't talk to people about my work very often. And it's sort of the like weird fiction of art school, I think, that like you're all sitting around, you got 20 or 15 photographers and a couple of professors, and you're all sitting around and talking about your work. And that just like, it's actually, I mean, it happens. I have some friends and colleagues that I do that with, but it's pretty rare. Like, we're kind of in a bubble as an artist. And I'm really not a hermit personality wise. Like, I like to talk through problems, and I'm a pretty social person verbally. And that's been, I think, quote unquote, making it as an artist. I sort of laugh because I'm like sitting there by myself. I'm like, well, this was the goal. It's like, here I am, by myself. And so it is important, though, I think that, and you're always wonderful about, reporting, like, what was the conversation, good and bad, you don't sugarcoat it, or at least I don't think, maybe you do. But just like, what is the dialogue after a fair? What is the conversation? And, we could sell a bunch of work, but that doesn't mean that I ever know anything past me shipping the print and getting the paycheck. And
no, and I do try and, when I hear from a client, sometimes clients will send me photographs of my artist's work on their walls. And I do tend to pass that on to you guys. I want you to see that. And if someone says to me, oh my God, I mean, I think you and I had this recently where a client bought one of the large waterfalls, and, it just has made her so, so happy. She just spends all this time sitting and staring at it. And it's been just a wonderful addition to her life, I think, especially the last, 5 months. And I think I did tell you that. I did pass that on. I think this was in March, maybe April. But no, of course, you don't always. I definitely hear, as your art dealer, I definitely hear more than you do in that respect, which is a little odd.
But I think I do think for artists, it is an important thing to find, not to be, bathing in praise from people and all admirers. Like, I don't think that that's good, but I do think it's important to be able to find ways of having dialogues around your work in a helpful way.
Yeah, I agree. Let me pivot to a larger sort of more existential question. Is there value in your work? In the actual work, not in the making of it? Is there value in what you're putting out into the world?
Well, value to who, I suppose? You mean value to who? Like, when you ask that, I'm curious, like, do you mean society? Do you mean the people buying it? Do you mean me?
Well, I think the people buying it, seeing it, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I have a feeling we all ask ourselves these questions. And I do think art is important. I know it's made a huge difference in my life. I mean, look at the history of human civilization. It's been a long lot. It's sort of been the constant stream almost above almost everything else that has been since the start of, people living in caves. And so I trust in that there is value to artwork. And in that way, I hope that my work shares part of that, that role in society as value. But it's, especially, I don't know, in times like now, and it also seems, I guess the art market side of it which is weird because the art market and selling work is like weirdly where art really gets the value number put on it. Like how much is this thing worth monetarily speaking?
Yeah, well, that's a different kind of value.
Yeah, it's a different value, but I think it also, like, that dialogue around like the art market, like it does sometimes feel like, where is the value of this? Like, these are luxury goods, in some ways. And it's something I struggle with a lot. I have a really close friend who's a musician, and he plays in large venues and whatnot. And I always loved how that was so like democratic. Like, anyone could listen to music, especially now it's easier, but like anyone could kind of own an album. They could spend a little more and go see it in person. And, he made his living and makes his living through mass numbers, and that so many people can own that thing that he makes. And I always felt that, I don't know, I'm making work that not a lot of people in the world can afford. And the goal is to make it, I suppose, the goal of the art market is to make it less and less affordable. And that's something that, I know you and I have talked about, and something that's, I think about it. I do. Is it crippling? Absolutely not. But it is something that, I don't know. I like the idea of, and my work, I guess, in particular, I think a lot of work looks good in books. I think a lot of work can be seen on websites, and I think my work doesn't fit into that so well. And it's very much about the print in a frame on the wall, lit well. And you can see it in a gallery or museum, but to see it in that way, you do have to own it. But do I think there's value? I hope so. I trust that there is, although at times I doubt it.
So I want to talk a little bit about sort of where you are right now.
Mm-hmm.
The work that you've predominantly made over the past 10 years-ish has been, as you just alluded to, work that is very dark, multiple bodies of work that are all black and white and have just a tremendous amount of dark values in them, literally. And
a few all white ones.
Yes, right. Of course, there's the all white ones also, right? Yeah. But the most popular of those series is the Rivers and Falls series. And I guess I'm going to ask you two questions at once and just answer however you want. I mean, the two things I'm sort of would love to hear you talk about is, one, how do you follow up something as popular as Rivers and Falls? Because I imagine that there's a lot of pressure, not from me.
No, not from you. Yeah.
But in general, because you have made a living selling that work and have gotten tremendous amount of really wonderful feedback about it. What's the struggle with creating a new body of work? How do those things, play on your mind?
Right. Yeah, well, I think actions speak louder than words in some ways. And if you asked me how I follow up that, we had to be fair, that work started when I was at Stanford, and I think in a lot of ways grew out of being in California, being in the West, and being, having that experience. So I started, making the night landscapes back in around 2012, and that evolved into the Rivers and Falls. I thought of it as a slightly, different project, but we had that show in 2015, is that right? And I sort of stopped. I stopped making them, and it's not entirely true. I still make them, but I'm not actively seeking to make that picture. So how do I follow it up? I follow it up by not making them anymore, which is insane in some ways. I mean, it's a side of myself that I'm comfortable with to a certain degree, but I mean, I could have made my life a hell of a lot easier on myself if I, evolved and slowly made new ones. And I don't know, I guess I think of it though as, maybe I'll link it up with, I like the way Sugimoto works in series, in that, his current work is not seascapes or, the horizon pictures, but he's still making them. He still continues to make them. And so I think that's how I look at that work. But yeah, I really pivoted. And not to say
you're shooting color now.
I'm shooting in color. Yeah. A lot has changed on sort of the technical front, but I like a technical. I'm not only when I say technical, that doesn't mean camera and equipment as much as it means the conceptual side of what I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. I've just, every time I've started something new, I like a challenge. And I think it is a struggle, but it's a struggle that I think is an important one to have, at least for me. It's what motivates me to make work and to, I'm sort of again, not like super camera oriented, but technical person. Like I like tinkering. Like it took me, for instance, with the rivers and falls and all that dark work, it took me over a year in a spray booth to figure out how to exhibit that work without glazing. And, that's probably my most frequent email after like a fair or something, is I get other artists emailing me, how did you do that? Or what is your formula? And, the funny thing is I've never played it close to the chest. I tell them exactly what I do and exactly the formula and what I use. And I say, and I earnestly say, good luck. I wish you the best.
Listen, I remember when I first visited you out in California.
Oh my
and
God.
You were basically like in a hazmat suit with a gas mask on.
Which is right when Breaking Bad was out. And I do remember I had my like spray tent on the against a fence, and on the other side of the fence lived my neighbor, who was a firefighter, it turned out, and we didn't chat a lot, but he sees me going out in this hazmat suit and big respirator, and I wave, grinning ear to ear, like, oh hey, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, I wonder what he thinks I'm up to in there.
What we're talking about is that you spray a lacquer. We don't put any glazing over your dark work. It just would become too much like a mirror. So
yeah, I think of it actually as looking through a window at night versus being out in the landscape at night.
Right.
That's a
wonderful way of putting it. So in order to protect the prints as best we can,
yeah,
you spray a lacquer that, gives them some amount of protection. And you had to tinker for a really long time to find one that didn't change the prints from looking the way you wanted them to look, basically. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I figure if the art thing doesn't work out, I could own a spray tanning salon or a auto body shop where I could paint cars at this point. But no, I think that is this type of problem that or type of challenge that I find, which, having something that I want, like when I wanted to make pictures that felt like being in the world at night. I wanted to replicate and bring that experience of being in this vastness back to a viewer, whether it's me or other people. And I want that to be as clean of a solution as possible. And, keep in mind, I worked in this field as like a professional problem solver of mounting and framing and stuff. So I have that background and sensitivity to that. I mean, I had that sensitivity, which is what got me that job. And then that only got stronger being there. But you take one step at a time, one foot in front of the other, I guess. And before you know it, you got a goddamn spray booth in the backyard. And, you have something that you want to exist in the world. And I think as artists, or at least the way I work, is I have to have some sort of vision of what that final thing is going to be. And that might evolve over time, but I very much envision what the thing is going to look like on the wall and what that experience is going to be. And what the path to get there, I don't know it takes some weird turns. I don't think that there's any right or wrong way to view work, and especially not mine. And as you know, I mean, I'm making work that I expect and assume a pretty heavy role on the viewer to participate in. I mean, that's just the nature of the work. I mean, that's why, they're so damn dark, is I need sort of the thing that I felt in front of an Ad Reinhardt painting when I finally got over his kind of pompous way of writing about painting and was like, all right, I'm going to actually try this and stand in front of it. And I've said, oh my God, this is like the most generous piece of art I've ever experienced, because I'm making it, or at least I think I'm making it with the artist. And like, he created a springboard for me to investigate something in myself.
I know what you're talking about, but would you just, I mean, people can Google Ad Reinhardt and...
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Will you just be more specific about...
Oh, yeah. He's like, I think it's always he's probably the person that's like the running joke in like comic books or something, or like comic strips of like conceptual art or whatever. It's like the black rectangle, and, which started with Malevich, and, lots of people have dabbled in the white Rauschenberg and the white canvas and all of this. But Reinhardt was the one sort of from the abstract expressionist, minimalist painting, later, that he started making just what looked like black canvases. And they are really subtle and they have a very fragile surface, which I appreciate. And if you're looking at it from across the museum, it looks like a black rectangle and you're like, oh, give me a break. Conceptual art. That's sort of the like, and for me, like that I actually have always loved minimal painting and minimalist art, but
you're a minimalist.
Yeah, it's probably no big surprise there. But my hang up with him was always like, which a lot of the abstract expressionist men, like these guys, these like Pollock, and they were always like, so we ended painting, like this is the end, like we have dominated, and Reinhardt was like, really thought that was the end of painting. And he wrote about it. And Reinhardt scholars will probably disagree with all of these things, but that was my interpretation of it. And I just wasn't interested. But one day, and it was, after being in Yosemite and a lot of these big places in California, it was at SF Moment. I went up and I was like, all right, screw it. I'm going to try. And I just stood there and I felt this like, looking into this black rectangle, I like thought I saw something, and it was sort of a cross motif of like slightly different variations of gray or even just the sheen of the paint, and very subtle color hue shifts. And I remember the first seeing, and I was like, is that there? Is it a reflection, or is it my reflection, or maybe I'm seeing it wrong, or maybe it's not quite well lit? And then I was, no, it's there, and that just it went on for about 20 minutes, and before I knew it, it turns out I think it was in paint, but I had to play a role in forming that. And I assume that's why that work, I don't know if other viewers of that work play that game, but I have to assume so.
And that's exactly what you do in your dark landscape and Rivers and Falls series, is you ask the viewer to just stand there for a while and let the detail that is actually there reveal itself to you once your eyes start to adjust to the darkness.
Right. And I love the idea of someone, passing by from, if they don't look closely, saying, black rectangle, that's sort of like, that's sort of my dream, is that someone like swats it through the air, like, oh, not interested, but then like comes back, and like somehow sees it in a different way. Do you see that happen?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. All the time. And I tell this to, clients and people I'm working with, showing your work all the time. I explain this, look, with all my artists, I try very hard to be your ambassador. So when I'm talking about my artist's work, I'm trying to talk about it the way you would talk about it if you were there, so that, I'm a good stand-in. So listen, we have to wrap this up because we're going on for a while here, but I just want to say, I think it's a really beautiful, what you just talked about. I think there's a lot of value in what you just said to people who are making work themselves. And because what you just described is influence and a continuation, an art historical continuation where you were very influenced by Ad Reinhardt, and you can see that in your work and how you take from one artist and, take ideas, influences, and work it into your own work. I mean, often I hear from people that they're scared of being influenced by, they don't want to be derivative. And I always
give me a
say to
break.
people, right, don't worry so much about that. You have your own point of view. Influence is a really beautiful thing. It can also, it can just set you up with parameters that are very important.
No, I think your advice to people is great. I think, and this is something I've seen with my students a lot and absolutely experienced myself a lot. And I think we all go through, I don't know, there's something about, right? Good art is new art in some ways, and like is, it's straight from the soul and uninfluenced. I think it's a lot of BS. And I think that actually good art also does have a dialogue, but the thing that I like to do is if I'm feeling, when I'm doing something new like that, go put your picture in an image search, something like Pinterest or whatever, and then just see what the aggregate is of like what you find. You'll feel like crap right away. I'm like, oh my God, everyone's done this. This is album covers. This is like interior design. This is all these things. And you'll realize like, you know what? Nothing's new, especially now. I mean, there's so many creators of things. And I think the way that I then manifest that is in kind of like what you said is, you take your influences, Ad Reinhardt, Carlton Watkins, in my case, and others.
Ansel Adams.
Sure. Yeah. Carlton Watkins is my personal of the whole landscape guys hero. But yeah, absolutely. These were all people that I was literally standing in the place that they made their pictures. I was doing it in a different way. But I think if you stick with it long enough and you really listen to your gut and you listen to your own personal taste and your own personal experience, there's no way it's not going to be a genuine effort on your part. That if it's new and it looks different, then great. That's kind of a side project, I think, or a side effect of making work that's genuine to you.
And can I also just say, because I think this is so important, I actually think there was such a show of confidence and strength when you were making your dark landscapes and you went and stood where Carlton Watkins or Ansel Adams had stood and made some pictures, and you were like, I'm going to stand here in homage to them, but I'm going to do my version. And,
right.
I love that confidence to acknowledge the dialogue. It's like you were sort of jumping in. It's a jazz band and you were jumping in for your solo and riffing off of what had come before. And I really love that. And I think people too often tie themselves up in knots trying to be like no one. And I just think people waste too much psychic energy trying to create something that's not like anything in any way that's ever come before it. And it's
right.
like, oh my gosh.
I mean, look at, I say like, just make work that's genuine and don't make work that looks like anyone else. That's easy to say, but the reality is when I stopped and said, this is done, it kind of didn't look too much like other stuff that I had seen, and it looked physically different. And for me, I think that is something that ultimately is important, that there's like something fresh. We are in visual art after all, and you can have concepts be different and all of that, but ultimately, like, I wanted the thing to look a little different. And it's not to say that no one else had made images that look like this and haven't, because that's not the case.
But it can look different while tipping your hat.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, hey, I sort of went into it like, well, why do I have to make pictures of Yosemite? Carlton Watkins did this with a mule team and tons of glass plates, and like, I'm not going to do better. Like, I can only build upon that and hope to bring my own stance on it. But so, yeah, that's my sense is you got to go through the motions. So you got to make yourself feel really bad and that all the work in the world's been made, and then listen to your gut and follow it, and you'll give birth to something that will probably be genuine. Right on. All right. Well, listen, I'm going to wrap it up here. Adam, thank you so much for doing my podcast. Of course, I love talking with you. And yeah, thanks, and be well, be safe. Send my love to everyone, your whole crew, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Sash. This has been fun. Okay. Bye everyone. Bye-bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The associate producer is Taylor Selsback, and the executive producer is Sasha Wolf. Our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe and rate us with all the stars available on your listening platform.